So, inshallah, before we get into our discussion on domestic violence, it's a really sensitive topic, and I'd just like to say to the audience that if you are triggered by anything that is said here, or by the very topic of domestic violence, please don't think that you have to sit and listen to the whole thing in one go. Of course, it's going to be informative, but you can take your time and do it. And if you are triggered by any of the discussions here, if you do require immediate help, please do go out and seek help. You can ring the police 999 straight away, or you can ring 111, the NHS mental health support line, and they will be able to help you. I just wanted to kind of give that warning before, because it is a very sensitive topic and not everybody is able to kind of take on the content of things like this all at once.
Support services.
So inshallah, once this podcast is uploaded, in description section, we will inshallah ensure that we place information for you there where you can find the support that you need. Thank you so much.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم. Respected viewers, it's a great privilege and an honor for us to be hosting this special podcast on this 9th day of the month of Muharram as we commemorate the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Today we are here to talk about an issue which is sparsely addressed in our conversations in the community and perhaps requires our attention. In these days of Muharram, we commonly commemorate the oppression that was inflicted upon the family of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and we commemorate Imam Hussein's stand against oppression. But there are other forms of oppression which are taking place commonly here within the community which hardly get recognized or noticed. I am, of course, speaking about the oppression that takes place in the household, that takes place against children, against women. I'm, of course, referring to the issue of domestic abuse and domestic violence. I have today with me a very respectable panel of experts to delve further into this topic. So, as way of introduction, I'm honored to have Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, who has joined us today for this panel. Sheikh has been addressing us here at these Mancom Majalis regarding Imam Hussein's stand against oppression. And inshallah, we can have a further detailed conversation into this particular issue. Secondly, I'm joined by Sister Fizza Tajwar, who is the founder of the Imam al-Mahdi Awareness Campaign. She's a therapist and a counselor within the Shia Muslim community here in the Northwest. And she's also running an organization by the name of 12, which offers mental health and counseling support to members of the community here, as well as to the wider public. And thirdly, I'm joined by Dr. Sania Naqvi, who is a local GP and a practitioner in the community here in Manchester. She was a long-time trustee of the Islamic Unity Society and has a wealth of experience in community organizational matters, as well as now a GP picking up some of the caseload related to this issue. So let me begin by first putting this question, an open question to the panel. What is domestic violence? Why is it important?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to the respected panel and everybody who is listening. Alhamdulillah, I feel really privileged to be here in the days of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, talking about such an important topic, which I think each one of us have experienced at some point and at some capacity in our lives. And what better time to be talking about it than in the days of Abdullah alayhi salam. And I think it's important to address why we're talking about it before we talk about what is abuse, because I think people are familiar with what abuse actually means. But why we need to talk about it is because in our professional capacities and in our kind of social capacities, we are seeing a rise in domestic violence and a rise in people feeling very hopeless in how they can deal with this issue. Not just deal with it, but deal with it in the most wise way, in the most intellectual way, in line with their religion and their social obligations, their familial obligations as well, because it's a very, very sensitive topic. As a therapist, I can 100% say that all of my clients have experienced domestic abuse. And if I kind of map that to the rest of the community, that would be at least 60% who at one point or the other have experienced domestic abuse. And that is a huge number, a big enough number for us to be thinking, why is there nothing in the community?
So in terms of your clients are primarily based from within the Shia community, or?
Yeah, all Shia. All of my clients are Shia, hence 12 counselling services. This is why I set up the service.
Yeah.
Because of my experience before that working in the community and people talking to me about their experiences, I wanted to have a professional capacity in which I could create a safe space where people felt comfortable talking to me about it, but I was also informed about how I can support them both when they're in therapy with me or if I needed to then signpost them to other services that are required. In terms of what domestic abuse is, it is any kind of harm that is perpetrated on any other person, and that's it. It doesn't matter who you are, what gender you are, what religion, what age. That has no bearing on the definition of abuse. It can be abuse if it happened once, and it can be abuse if it happened 1,000 times. It is still considered as abuse. So anything that harms another person done intentionally for selfish purposes or to intentionally actually hurt somebody is abuse.
And I suppose it could take many forms.
Yeah.
Typically, people associate domestic abuse with physical abuse.
Yes.
That's a big part of it. But often, emotional abuse is a massive part. Neglect of children, psychological abuse, sexual abuse. Also, something that's coming more to the forefront. Coercive control.
Yes.
And
financial abuse.
Can you define what coercive control is? What does that mean?
Potentially, there's two people in a relationship. One person puts limitations. You can only go out between these timings. You can only meet these people. You will not speak to these, your family members. Their phones are being checked. They don't have control of finances. You want to go into the groceries. Well, here's £10 or set amount. They don't have freedom that, and then they're reporting back. They're not treated as an equal in the relationship. It's massively.
So the sense I'm getting from hearing the two of you is that this is a massive problem within the Shia Muslim community here. So just to bring Sheikh in on this, what is the Islamic perspective on some of what the sisters have mentioned? Just casually, you hear that, oh, I hit my wife because, the Quran allows me to do that. There's a verse in, I think the commonly cited verse in Surah An-Nisa, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ, that, if she doesn't behave, I can hit her. What does Islam actually say about some of this?
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Wa salli ya Rabbi ala Muhammad wa alihi al-Tahirin. Assalamu alaikum to the dear panel and to the respected audience as well. The Holy Quran has the word urf or ma'ruf about 20 times. And the meaning of this term is to live in accordance with the urf, the way in which people would commonly live well with one another. So it tells us that we have to live in ma'ruf with one another. What's really interesting is 50% of those times, it directly refers to the relationships between man and woman, husband and wife. So the definition that Islam gives of domestic violence is actually the types of definitions that we would find here. There's not one definition that the Quran or the Hadith give. Rather, it says you're expected to live with each other in goodness and as the way the urf would do, how you would commonly live with each other in fairness, in justice, in kindness. And when we fall out of that, the definitions that you just heard, Islam would say those definitions are the definitions of domestic violence and abuse, because you're no longer living in kindness, in fairness, in justice with one another. So, for example, how does the Quran and Hadith couch this issue further? It's really interesting to see how the Quran and Hadith demand that we live in a state of security with one another. Let me refer you to one example from the Quran. Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse 239. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا. If you are in danger, then say your prayers on foot or on horseback. فَإِذَا أَمِنْتُمْ فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَمَا عَلَّمَكُمْ مَا لَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْلَمُونَ. And when you are secure, then remember Allah, and He has taught you what you did not know. Meaning that even the salah is not prayed until you are secure. A person imagines that if they have a wajib, they have to perform their wajib immediately. The Quran says no. Wait till if you're in a fear of danger, get out of the danger first. Your security comes first, even before you're praying of your salah. Can you see the emphasis on your own personal security, welfare, your mind feeling that you are in a state of comfort, not anxiety, not distress? The ahadith are replete on this. For example, the sister mentioned any type of harm that you are being put into, psychological harm, physical harm, emotional harm, financial harm. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "La dharar wa la dhirar." No harm, no harming. You're not allowed to harm another person.
Yep.
The Prophet said, "Afshu bis salam," spread peace. The Prophet said, "La khayra fil watan illa ma'al amni was surur." There's no value to living in a place unless you have security and happiness. So in a relationship, in a family unit, the issue of safety, security, freedom from harm is sacrosanct in Islam. And as you heard, it could be a mother abusing a daughter. It could be a husband abusing a wife. It could be a wife abusing a husband. Any of these relationships which entail abuse are haram, and you're going explicitly against the dictates of the Quran and Sunnah.
I think you said something really important, Sheikh, as well, that we shouldn't limit. I think when we hear domestic abuse, we usually think of marital abuse or abuse that is happening. Yes. We usually think of domestic abuse as as abuse between husband and wife.
Okay.
But there is a whole array of incidences that we can class as domestic abuse, and that's one is elderly abuse, child abuse, abuse from in-laws, which is something that I experience even in therapy quite a bit. Yeah. And then people who are partners, intimate partners, but not necessarily married. These are also other forms of domestic abuse. So I don't think it's helpful for us to kind of
pigeonhole it into
filter it down to just domestic abuse being within a marital relationship. Okay. And because it leaves out very vulnerable people when addressing this topic.
I think the other trap people often fall into, people who might be in struggling or dysfunctional relationships that are abusive. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's between me and the partner. Oh. It's just us. The children are not involved. Mm. The children don't know. And I think there's a lack of insight there into how far it reaches.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so turning to talk about some of the impacts of some of this on the home, or as you said, because it's quite a spectrum of things that you've brought in.
Yeah.
What sorts of things are you picking up, I suppose, in your casework? How common are problems being transferred? I mean, talking about the impact on children, for example.
So I work in the medical field, and I think society is struggling, not just emotionally, but physical health too. And often the first sign that you might see is someone coming to see you with multiple physical problems. Symptoms might be vague, frequently presenting, whether they're an older person, someone a bit younger, or even children, challenging behaviours, bedwetting, an array of medical problems. And there is detective work to be done, and you might not notice or pick this up at the very first instance. I guess once you've made a relationship, when you start to notice patterns, and you think, where is this coming from? And you realise that things are not quite right at home, and the effects of that are so far-reaching.
Yeah.
That it has affected their physical health, and that's how they first present. So they might not come and say, actually, this is what's happening at home. You'll get to that a lot further down the line, I suspect, when you see them.
Absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily mean that children or young people are directly involved with the domestic violence either. They could be just witnessing something. And if they sense a threat to their secure base, or if they sense that this secure base is going to be dismantled, or there's going to be a separation between parents or anything like that, it will cause physiological effects. I've worked for the last 12 years in education, and I have seen the rise in looked after children. I have seen the rise in fostered children because of that secure base being taken away, or not enough attention being placed upon how we can create more secure bases so that children can experience secure attachments. We are left with dealing with the results of that rather than getting down to the root problem and preventing it, rather than finding a cure after something actually then goes wrong. So it is prevalent and it's on the rise. And in our kind of careers, or the paths that we've chosen for ourselves, we see it in both sides, how it's affecting the children, and it's how it's affected the adults, and how most likely it's going to further on go ahead and affect future generations. In the work that I'm doing now around attachments and creating secure bases, because essentially that's where everything grows from. That's the foundation of every single individual, every single family member, is their home life. So how do we work on that? There is a huge base of research to be done on this, that has been done on this, but we need to be able to use it to better our own communities. And we start off by raising awareness like we are doing now.
Sheikh, just to bring you in, you were an imam of a mosque previously. Obviously, our Maulanas are seen as a trusted sort of resource within the community, people to turn to in times, like these, whether it's marital issues or other issues. Do you think that the community has a robust enough, just in terms of your experience, response or resilience to deal with the sorts of issues that the practitioners are sort of referring to?
In a word, no.
Yeah.
I think the community lacks internal institutions to be able to support these types of cases. It also, the value of a community is that you are a village. The challenge of that is that when certain issues arise, people are very afraid to talk about it because people know one another.
Yeah.
And there's a stigma, and it's like, well, we don't want this to get out, or we don't want our family to be, sort of tarnished with this. And as a result, a lot of this stuff is buried, but that doesn't stop the problem. It doesn't actually confront it, deal with the types of problems and traumas that come out of it. So my view is that every community needs certain institutions. For example, the 12ers one is a phenomenal institution. Safe spaces for women to be able to go to. I remember during the pandemic, as an example, because people were locked down with one another. Yeah. Normally, in my words, you had very dysfunctional families or relationships, and at least people could go out. Yeah. The husband could go to work. The wife could go out with friends, But when they're locked down with each other for 24 hours a day, and they don't approach one another with respect, and normally 24 hours is just going to blow up. Mm-hmm. And we actually had a rise in the number of women in the community seeking shelter, safe spaces. And actually, people within the community then had to offer their own homes during the pandemic to be that space for other women to be able to flee the violence that they were usually able to escape, at least, whereas in this circumstance, unable to escape. The second major problem outside of institutions in the community is sort of toxic masculinity is a phrase that is being co-opted. And I don't want to use it in the sense in which sort of the red pill online community is using. But still, the challenge is that when people come to us and say that there is this problem in the family unit, most often it is the mother or the wife that wants to be able to make a serious change in the family structure or the problem that they're having. Trying to get the husband or the father to the table is neon impossible. Even to have consistent phone calls with them, say, let's talk about this. When can you come in and meet? The extent by which people are on the defensive, unwilling to take accountability, unwilling to listen to the other side, it is really troubling. And so when you mentioned earlier about sort of ayat or cultures that sort of reinforce this, they immediately go back to these sorts of things and say, well, this gives me the space to act as I want. Yeah. This is how we are in the Pakistani community or the Indo-Pak community or in the Iraqi community. It's not a justification. It's not excusable between you and God. And these are major barriers that we have to overcome. What I'll say is this. We have been here as a community for decades now. I feel it is unacceptable that we as a community keep putting money into things that we don't need to put into, and we don't put the funds necessary into the types of streams that we need to go into. I don't know how many more masajid we need. I don't know how many more centers we need. And if you are buying centers, there needs to be spaces in those centers. Or let me reword that. If you're spending money on a center now, part of that budget needs to include from the outset a permanent, employed, professional counselor who has a space inside that center, 9 to 5. So the same way Sister, for example, is trained in this area, the next time a mosque is built, they should be employing her or someone like her into that space. That's her base. She has available walk-in clinics. She has set times when people can come and make bookings with her. The community knows her, trusts her, understands that she has knowledge of the Shia school of thought, how to be able to deal with things. We are not talking about living here in the 1980s. We have not just come here after Gulf War I in 1991 as a Iraqi diaspora community. This is 2025. We're literally buying buildings that are costing millions. If you can't afford the salary of a key worker in this space as part of that, you are completely ignoring the reality of what a modern day institution requires.
It's a very big reality actually on the ground. So you have most often women who have fled, fear of safety, often in fear of their lives, and the detrimental impact it's having on their children. They're often housed in emergency shelters, inadequate, for their family needs. And, these women often are isolated, financially, that, things are difficult, and they don't last very long in these setups. Where days, often weeks. Yeah. And they'll often say, actually, it wasn't sustainable. My children were suffering. And they then return back to that environment because they haven't been able to move forward from that. And I think the community probably does need to address some of these.
And I think the days of Abdullah alayhi salam are, we need to really recheck, okay, if I want to stand up against oppression. We read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says that my son will be killed thirsty and hungry on the plains of Karbala. Whoever helps him has helped me and has helped the Hujjah al-Qaim alayhi salam.
Yeah.
What does it mean to help Imam Hussein now?
In a practical sense.
sense. Like, where is the 0% tolerance against any form of oppression and abuse in our community? Where if I, as a sister, had a problem, I'd know there's 20 brothers in the community who, if I told that this is what's happening in my house, they would be outside my door coming to my aid. You know, like, have we got, as sisters, or have our children got that faith in the community that, and even men, I mean, the men, the brothers that I counsel, they are also, even though some of them are perpetrators, some of them may be victims, but no one is set out to be an abuser, and no one is set out to be somebody who's being abused. There are core reasons why this is happening.
Yeah, so you're touching on a very interesting point. We've talked about that abuse exists, but let's explore some of the reasons why it exists. So what is making somebody abuse somebody else? What's gone wrong?
I don't think any parent, if you look at that relationship, sets out to abuse their child. I think sometimes it's just a culmination of circumstances. It might be financial hardship, it may be health, generational trauma, past experiences, and then it accumulates, and then this, for them is an outlet. I've suffered.
So the victim becomes the perpetrator. Because
anyone who oppresses somebody else, from my experience, was either oppressed themselves at one point in time, or they have oppressed themselves in the sense that they forgot God, and then they forgot themselves.
Example, they may have abused alcohol, or
so
maybe getting into problems and financial problems themselves, and they take out those stresses on others.
Yeah, that's the kind of abuse that they've experienced.
For themselves.
No, with themselves, it's a deeper spiritual level, but because I think that once we move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a psychological reality, this is not just me speaking spiritual language here, this is a psychological reality where we move away from any kind of accountability, where we move away from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshipping the internal idols that we place for ourselves or idols around us. We oppress ourselves in that sense, because we begin thinking that we're gods, and then we are not accountable, and then develop a sense of entitlement to that. When we are younger, the younger we are, the more we develop a mindset of servanthood. I know there's a lot of talk about leadership, but actually that will come from servanthood. If you look at Imam Ali alayhi salam, anyone who he appointed as a governor weren't necessarily experienced in leadership. They were experienced in servanthood, because they showed themselves to be good followers. When we don't do that, that's in that sense, we oppress ourselves. When we move towards abusive actions such as alcohol or any kind of addiction, it is numbing a pain. There is a pain inside. So this is the understanding we need to develop, even in terms of addiction and people who are addicted. What do we think of them? Do we just look at them as sinners? Or have we actually sat down with them and tried to ask them what happened? What need is being met through your addiction? What need wasn't met through your addiction? And that's how broad our mind needs to be in terms of the fact that we need to help perpetrators, and we also need to help the victims.
That's really interesting, this point that I was trying to raise earlier, that in a community center, you need a space where there are counselors. At the beginning of this conversation has been focused on victims.
Yeah.
But what you're saying here is perpetrators also need therapy.
Absolutely.
So people who are perpetrators also need to come through the door and say, I'm struggling with this, I need help.
Okay, there's two of the things. So the first thing is the breaking of the cycle.
Yeah.
Of, dealing with the perpetrators. And then we talk about safe spaces, community centres, having psychologists. Maybe we need to get a step back from that. For some of these people, it's quite isolating. And to go into a centre and address psychology is a massive step. And there's just a basic thing of you're a part of the community. Know your community, know who your friends are. Be mindful of people and people's struggles. Yeah. And we're not expecting, what are you up to, and knowing, but being that person. You could be that person that someone discloses that piece of information too.
Absolutely. At least at the base level of having an empathetic listening ear and having the knowledge to where to signpost an individual if they need help.
I think you raised the point that some of the ladies might not know that they're actually being abused, and then if they are being abused, how to get that help.
So it's about education, isn't it?
It's a really,
because for some people they think it's a cultural norm,
and it's a heartbreaking reality.
And then maybe it's for up to the children. The children are educated. The children, they're in madrasas, in schools. This is not acceptable behaviour, and they feed back into the family home.
I think the other issue is confidentiality. Nearly every one of my clients, every session, when they started counselling with me, they would say, Sister Fizza, are you sure this will remain confidential? Number one, confidentiality. Number two, judgment. Oh, I don't know how to tell you this because you're going to think this of me. And that's showing to me the mindset of the community and the barriers that people are experiencing when it comes to us seeking help. The very questions they're asking me. Like literally saying, I want to tell you that this is the problem, Mum, whether it's addiction. Yeah. And it's both brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter who it is. There is so much shame and guilt, which is understandable. But the heartbreaking part of that is that has led to them not seeking help for so many years, which has compounded problems over and over and over again.
I think you referred to, or I think Sheikh referred to having safe spaces, and we've started to define some of what a safe space looks like. And you've referred to the issue of confidentiality, and part of that might be that the safe space needs to have that confidentiality element to it. And part of it might be that it might be a safe space in the mosque. And part of it might be that actually there might be an outreach aspect to it, as opposed to something that's provided within the center. What else do you think a safe space would need, just as an imam, as a therapist, as a GP? Good.
One thing that I find really beautiful about the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I believe anywhere can become a safe space.
Yeah.
Once the problem is being acknowledged. One of the things he used to do is, if somebody used to come and give him a problem or tell him about a problem, what he'd do is get on the minbar straight away, right? This is a problem in the community, and give a khutbah about it. He'd make sure that the awareness is there straight away, that I've heard this is happening, but instead of just addressing that person, why don't you just address the entire community? So if this problem comes up again, then everybody would know the rulings or the ethical way to deal with things or whatever. It was a very open conversation.
Building on that, do you think, Sheikh, that the imams within our community are on board with this? Do you think that, I don't want to say they're part of the problem, or do you think they're responsive enough to issues like these? Do you think that, I don't know how the Hawza is and how much training there is given in issues such as social issues such as these? I mean, is it part of the curriculum, or, how is it? Or is it more focused on just fiqh and aspects of that, as opposed to social issues like, providing therapy and things like that? Is that part of the training of being an imam?
That's a really good question. I think the younger generation of students, Islamic seminary students, realize how this needs to be a core aspect of their training. I think the elder ones have seen the problems, and every day that they are called with these problems, but they may not necessarily have been given the types of training in how to deal with, being sort of a movement between being the traditional imam and having a therapy background.
Yeah.
So in the traditional Hawza, unfortunately, no. What is taught is sort of the very black and white fiqh of sort of what is halal and haram, how to deal with divorce, and so on. But nowadays, Hawzat are starting to open up to having these sorts of training, especially Western sort of seminaries. They are considering, these sorts of techniques as to be a standard as part of their syllabus, which is a really important step, although belated. And people like Sheikh Muhammad Jawad Shomali, may Allah reward him for his incredible work. He has been a pioneer in bringing this to the pulpit. I think the Iraqi community, just as an example, a lot of the diaspora, when they moved, especially sort of 1991 onwards, there was this sort of expectation that this fall of Saddam would be imminent, and then they would return back to where they lived in Iraq. But then they stayed, and then they stayed, and then they brought their children up. And because the mentality was that we are going to go back, the sort of institutions that were needed to be built, the training of those ulama and imams that needed to be there, the forefront of the community, in my humble opinion, were not there. And then when the fall of Saddam did occur, you've settled yourself into this standard of living so well, there's not really a reason to go back to Iraq now. And that's what happened. Everybody stayed. And I mean this in complete honesty. You find that sometimes, may Allah bless them, there are 60-year-old men, and they've now, because they've got a first wife or a second wife, they've now got a 10 or a 15-year-old daughter. And the age gap is so far between this man, may Allah reward him, from being from Iraq, growing up in Iraq, to now having a daughter who's born and raised here, with the influences of social media, not wanting to wear hijab, the types of friend circles, the places that they're going. The age gap in the mentality is so wide that they just don't have the ability to be able to transcend that gap. And actually, these sorts of examples are far more common than you would imagine. And as a result, has the imam the ability to be able to, let's say imam, the resident alim, has he or she got the ability to be able to deal with this sort of person who is 50 or 60 years old? Have they got the ability to be able to reach out to a daughter of the community who's 15? These are things that we just have not had in the community. So it is absolutely necessary that the present and upcoming generation of students from the seminary consider these parts of training as core, not secondary, not tertiary, as core to their training. Because when you come back to the community, to be honest with you, this is probably 60% of what you're going to be dealing with. I remember your caseload is more this than anything else. People don't call me for salah and som and zakat.
Yeah.
They can now just Google that. Yeah. Dealing with trauma, I remember I was once resident alim in a community in London. Literally at 1 a.m, I was called out to an estate in South London. The mother has kicked the son out. The son has been violent and abusive towards the mother. The mother has tried to discipline the son by taking away his gaming, and the son's just gone ballistic. And the mother's kicked him out. Now, what does the mother want to do? Does the mother want to be able to call the police on their own child for being aggressive and violent? No. So where do they turn to? They turn to the resident alim. I've literally had phone calls in the night where a person from America is saying, I'm standing on a pier. Below me is crocodile-infested waters and I want to jump. I've literally had cases where a daughter of the community is saying, I'm getting beaten up by my father-in-law.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a first for me when I came across that case. And it was mind-boggling. And I remember, going back to Sister's point about how the Quran immediately intervenes and how the Prophet immediately intervenes. A few weeks later, after receiving this case, it was Eid al-Zahra. And I went on the pulpit and I spoke about how are you going to celebrate Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam and do tabarra of the one who attacked Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam when you men in the community are doing the same thing that Umar ibn al-Khattab did to Fatima al-Zahra? How can you cry over Sayyidah Ruqayya being slapped when Kholi and Shimr did the same thing you do to the daughters of your community. How well it was taken, Allahu A'lam. But you have to be aware and you have to be at the forefront and speak out. And obviously, I literally, and this is, Allah is witness to this, I got off the pulpit and I had an anonymous message from someone who was abusing and wrote a very nasty message to me. You know, from the internet, so your number can't be seen.
Yeah.
So someone sent me a message.
Threatening
You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything to my daughter-in-law. Oh, so you were there listening. Interesting. Got a very abusive message back to me for challenging these sorts of things. So the resident alim needs to be committed to this cause, have the capacity to deal with it, and have the infrastructure around him to be able to support.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. We focused trauma more generally. Let's come now more specifically to trauma that happens or abuse that happens within a marital relationship, because you would imagine that that's one of the most intimate, most trusted relationship that that can be between two people. I think you mentioned that a lot of your clients are predominantly women, but there are clients who are also male, and I'm saying this with a smile because I found that.
Couples also.
Yeah.
When somebody experiences trauma, the saddest thing is that they lose all sense of themselves.
Yeah.
And when you lose a sense of self and you don't know who you are, you spend your life trying to mold yourself into something that belongs somewhere. Then if you are in a relationship, but you know you're going to be fed, you've got a roof over your head, you've got clothes on the back, your basic needs are being met, but the environment is toxic. In order for your needs to be met, you will mold yourself in a way where you will either dissociate from the actual trauma that's happening in order to survive. And that's the difference. People who are going through trauma and trauma survivors are just surviving. There is no living in their life. They're not experiencing. They are getting through day by day, minute by minute, trying to survive. And imagine as a Shia Muslim, we have a very strong and firm identity.
Mm-hmm.
We have a very, very strong, firm identity. And I think if that is instilled at a young age, it covers a lot of things. But when there is any kind of psychological, physical, or any kind of abuse or any kind of trauma being experienced by any individual, there is a dissociation that happens inside physiologically between different parts of your own body. The brain, the nervous system, your actual organs. Yeah. Which then affects your brain, and it has a neurological imprint, which we have to understand from a scientific point of view too, that the human being is a makeup of lots of different systems, and this is both beautiful, but then if we've got to understand that if one is affected, everything else will also be affected. Yeah. So I think there needs to be some psychoeducation around how trauma actually impacts people on all levels. Yeah. And then how we can recognize this and how we can mitigate the damage that is done. Yeah. It will always be there. The trauma that you've experienced is always going to be there. It's not about getting rid of the trauma. It's about building the capacity around it. Your own capacity to be able to grow your life bigger than the actual trauma. And that's what we need. And then Rosh, when you asked Sheikh the question, like, how are the religious leaders contributing to this? I think any community organization has to be multidisciplinary, and the responsibility of that should not fall on one person's head. No, that's unfair and it's not practical. So it has to be a multidisciplinary panel where the experts in those fields can almost like train each other up. Us sitting here, just us four, there's so much I'm learning from you guys. You're probably getting insight from things that I'm saying from our education, from our background. But this is how we need to run the panels that are kind of trying to address these situations. It cannot fall on one person's head.
The MDT reminds me of the idea of collective ijtihad, but let's leave that discussion for another time.
Get us all in trouble.
Yeah, probably. So I think you mentioned about the impact of trauma on children and breaking the cycle so that the perpetrators, so the victims don't become perpetrators. In terms of steps that we can take professionally, what would you recommend as a medical professional in helping break that cycle so that we don't transfer and it doesn't become generational trauma? So just moving the conversation on to some of the solutions.
I think you kind of answered your question, sisters answered your question previously. It is an MDT approach. It's not a medical approach. It doesn't fall on, for example,
I want to define MDT for the...
Sorry, a multidisciplinary team, an MDT, which is made up of people from different professional backgrounds,
Like collective.
and they bring their expertise, and they all sort of come to a recommendation or a conclusion. So medically, I don't think there's a way forward. But
as a parent, for example,
it's a collective thing, isn't it? So you have typically the mothers wanting to break the cycle. We have making communities, friends, safe spaces, madrasas, schools. That's probably where it's going to start, because if you go to the top, you might not always be successful. But to try to break it, it starts from the early years. It will start from the early years. Excuse me.
we're talking about kids the age of 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, things like mother and baby groups. Make sure mum's getting out, they're networking, they're talking, they're sharing their experiences.
Yeah.
It might be a conversation of, I feel really tired. What happened? I'm left dealing with all of these things. I've got a child with challenging behaviour. I don't know how to manage all of that. My partner's, my husband is working all the hours. He doesn't feel that this is his role, and I don't know how to coordinate that with school. I'll have these discussions.
Yeah.
There are other sort of in the healthcare system, you have focused care practitioners who do liaise and deal with these things. It's something that's taken off, I think, in the last few years. They don't have a set role, but they literally just go to families who are struggling, pinpoint an area that they need help on, and say, okay, well, I'm going to help you with your housing. I'm going to liaise with school. You have a child who has extra needs. I'm going to try and get the schools. And we probably need that coordinated, targeted approach, in addition to psychological support, in addition to having an alim at the helm, So I think
there needs to be a focus on research as well, actual solid research. Asking your community, if every alim this Muharram had a questionnaire that everybody, before I start reciting, you need to finish this questionnaire, because we are researching the progress of our community. We are researching mental health issues in our community. Because research is now something that is everyone does.
Yeah.
Everybody's in schools, everybody's in colleges. They understand the concept of developing something that comes from research and something being research backed. It's not just coming from, my head or just something I read in a book. It's actually, it relates to the very community that I'm sat amongst.
What type of research, for example, this Muharram or between Muharram and Safar would you have? Could you give us an example of what how that might be structured in a community?
Absolutely. I think it was last Muharram, wasn't it? I did a just a simple Google survey. What do you call it? Google Sheets.
Yeah.
Google Sheets. And I just came to the front and I said, look, I'm researching mental health in the community. Please, can everybody fill in the...
It was a Fatimiyya program.
The Fatimiyya program.
what was the uptake from that, actually? Because I know it was anonymous.
Yeah.
I think people, like you said, there's a lot of stigma. People don't want to be labelled or...
Yeah, well, it was anonymous. But I think because the times that we did it was before a lot of people were there. So my job is now to rethink, okay, how can I do that better? Yeah. But if everyone is on the same page and the actual Sheikh is saying, look, you need to do that, otherwise I'm not going to talk. You need to fill this in. This is really important for us to address things that are happening in our community, then it would be absolutely amazing. I was at the very start of developing 12-hour counselling services at that time. And yes, I have work to do, but we learn with experience. We've got to put this emphasis on real life. What are your issues? And I think through that, kind of subconsciously, people will kind of understand as well that, okay, this has been flagged as an issue. And people want to know, the religious authority wants to know, the practitioners within the community want to know. They're taking a genuine interest in things that are actually happening in the community. One other thing, just on a side note that, well, not on a side note, it's really important, I want to address is there is a lot of, well, why don't you just leave?
Yeah, why do they stay? Why do they stay that with that person?
Yeah.
Is it like a Stockholm syndrome type?
It's if you think about it, it's a genuine question, isn't it? Like if you'd see somebody in a dangerous situation, in a situation, if you're seeing them in a dangerous situation, why aren't you leaving?
Yeah.
We have to understand that this is not as simple as it sounds and become very accepting of this fact.
Is it like a trauma bond, or is it like a...
There's lots of different reasons. So I listed them just because I wanted to get please, a line of everything, so that it's in everybody's minds that it's not as easy as just being able to get up and leave any kind of... and for a child, it's not easy for them to get up and leave the parents. Even as adults, I find clients find it so difficult to say that they were abused by their parents or say anything. What they will say is describe the abuse. Yeah, but they did what they could with what they had. They try so much. It's almost like they go back to that childlike body who still wants to see their parents in a good light because that was their method of survival. If they didn't see their parents as good, no matter what they were doing, they were not able to survive. It is heartbreaking how you see that dynamic play out in therapy. So why is it hard for some people to kind of leave these kind of situations? First of all, is fear of retaliation. Shame or self-blame. Many people, especially who's gone through narcissistic abuse, believe that they are part of the problem and they are the reason why somebody is abusing them. Cultural and religious pressure, lack of trust in authorities. And as I go through these, we will have come across experience in one of these at some point. Financial dependence, which is huge for people, especially women who have come from subcontinent, from Pakistan, from India, who haven't got financial independence here, or any kind of independence, to be honest. And then they are going through this, but they find it difficult to leave that situation. Isolation from support networks and fear of losing children. Many men in this country are being abused by women, are being wrongfully used by women, and they are dealing with psychological abuse. They are dealing with emotional abuse because they are afraid that they will lose the children, because it seems like what they feel is that this government is favoring women more than the men. So this is one really important point about men that I'd like to raise, is that they are suffering and
often silently
with abuse because of this issue.
I want to bring Sheikh in about two issues from an Islamic perspective. First one is, what is the Islamic response to the issue of trauma? What does Islam prescribe in terms of how to deal with it? Are there any du'as or something like that you can recommend? And the second point is around what Sister just said. Does Islam, is it more in favor of the woman than the man in terms of the rights it gives? As I think the sister is alluding to, that the law is being gamed in a way here in this country.
Country's law.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking about I'm talking about Islamic law.
Yeah.
Is it actually in favor of the woman? If I can phrase it that way.
I don't want to frame it in a way it says it's in favor of one or the other, because that would void the whole notions of equality and equity. Yeah, but let me answer it in a way that maybe people don't know about. If you take all of the verses of the Quran regarding relationships and look at them at the stages of a relationship is created, I would say to you about 90% of those verses are addressing men in their behavior towards women. not the other way around. Why would Allah in the Quran have to address men's behavior towards women? Attitude, approach, rights, fulfillment, encouragement, more so than women. As maybe, traditionally speaking, the stronger force within the relationship, it is the man that constantly needs to be addressed in his behavior. And that's what Allah is alluding to. I can give you examples. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 235, a man is addressed in the way in which he approaches a woman for marriage. Then, for example, in verse 228, there are the issues of rights in the marriage. Then in subsequent verses are rights and dealing with the matters of divorce. Then later on in the same sequence of verses comes the matters of what happens if you die. What are the provisions that should be left for your wife? Again, it's all addressing men, and the way in which they treat women. So from one perspective, I would say to you, yeah, actually it's equality and equity, but actually the favoring of women is actually there in the sense that men are constantly being addressed and told how to be able to treat a woman in their relationship. So I'll give you one verse that shows about the equity, and then, or rather equality, and then you see that there is an istithna, that there is an exemption when it comes to that matter of equality. So for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 228, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that in a marriage, the principle is that you are absolutely equal. The rights that a man has are equal to the rights that a woman has. That's shocking for most people to hear, because they think that a man has more rights than a woman has. The starting place is that whatever you have as a right, she has as a right. Whatever is upon you is upon her as well. The verse says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that they have rights similar to those that are rights against them in a just manner. So whatever is ma'roof, whatever is expected in a good and just, fair manner, those are equal rights. And then Allah says, the istithna, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً, and that men have a degree of responsibility. So again, the man is being told, you have to do better. You have to make sure that you stand up and meet the bar that is expected of you. So from the Quranic perspective, women should take a lot of solace that men are being addressed in this way. Pull up your socks, know your duties, know your responsibilities, know how you're supposed to support financially. So that helps actually with sort of the dealing with certain issues, because if the community is taught this set of verses when it comes to every stage of the marriage process, from sort of identifying the spouse all the way to death, if these verses would, and they're not many of them, it's about 20 in a sequence, if these verses were taught to men and women, they would have a very broad depth of understanding of those mutual responsibilities towards one another, and when those there istithna'at exist. Going back to the first question that you had about sort of how Islam deals with trauma, there are the sort of prescriptions that I mentioned in dua, turning to Allah, opening your heart, being able to cry. Remember those who are oppressed. You know, as the famous hadith says, if you must cry over something, cry over Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. It doesn't mean that you don't cry over yourself, but you remember the trauma of Imam al-Hussein as a way of relieving yourself. Really, what Islam would want us to do is to have access to those specialists. And it would say to us that this is a journey that needs to be taken individually and together between you and your partner, wherever possible. And those who are experts in leading you through that journey to help you build up resilience, deal with the matters that you have, that's the prescription that Islam has. And I can't emphasize enough how much individuals and couples have to go to therapy or to couples training to be able to deal with some of these issues. I think I mentioned this to you in passing. If I was in charge of the NHS, I would make it mandatory that every year people go for therapy. Right now, it needs to be built around that, because in private healthcare, there's a thing whereby if you have private healthcare, you get an annual checkup, right? Our entire body checkup. They'll do every major scan in order to see how you are feeling. Your mental health and sort of having a space to be able to talk to someone, even for one session, and then that person signposting you or saying you need to come back for further sessions. These things are necessary. And as I said earlier on, the resident alim needs to be trained, and people in the community should feel free to be able to come knock on the door of resident alim and say, these are the things I need to talk to you about. We don't have that system, but right now with the pressures that people are under, the financial pressures that people are under, cost of living crisis, these things are more and more required in the community structures that we have.
Thank you, Sheikh. We're coming towards the conclusion of our conversation. It's been really insightful to hear from all of you. We've spoken about some of the solutions. We've spoken about the need for workshops. We've spoken about the need to have multidisciplinary input. And we've spoken about the need for research and surveys and spreading awareness through perhaps conversations like these in creating that empathetic community that we've been referring to. Now, I just want to conclude by linking this back to, and I think you referred to this in your just comment just earlier, about Sayyid al-Shuhada, about Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. How is it that we can use his example? How is it that we can use Abu Abdullah as a motivator to accomplish some of the things that we've talked about? Any of the...
Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says that he rises in order to bring reform in the ummah, that the true sunnah has died and bid'ah has been enlivened. Part of the sunnah is to be able to explain these ayat properly to people rather than them being able to abuse the meanings of these ayat. So the famous one that you asked about or mentioned at the very, very beginning of the discussion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah An-Nisa, chapter number 4, verse number 34,
that's used as an excuse to...
If you are fearing nushuz, if you are fearing, sort of desertion or not fulfillment of the rights of your wife towards you, then you may admonish them, separate yourselves from your sleeping places, or then the part of the verse that is quite controversial says, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ, that you may beat them. Now, it's really important to understanding the meaning of this. It's the traditional way of understanding this is that you are allowed to strike your wife, but there are such limitations on it that it almost becomes impractical. Yeah? So, for example, if you first try to admonish your wife, I'm not happy with this behavior. Secondly, you separate from the sleeping places in order to be able to sort of rekindle that bond. If that doesn't work, then strike them. وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. Then the sort of conditions are mentioned explicitly, that you're not allowed to leave a mark, you have to use something as minimal as a toothbrush. From one perspective, if you look at it, you sort of laugh. You'll be like, well, what's the point of doing the act then? From another perspective, they'll say that this is creating such limitations that in all practical sense and purpose, that there's no way to be able to actually do this act. So it raises the question, well, why then would God say, perform this act in the first place? Why would he say strike in the first place? In order to make it so impractical that you have to use a toothbrush and sort of do that in order to not leave a mark. It doesn't make sense. Another way of looking at this verse is this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was dealing with a type of people that was so violent, so backwards, that in order to help them out of the ways in which they were living, he had to slowly but surely put in a number of things in place to be able to stop the violence from taking place. What a man did in Jahiliyyah, in the early times of Islam, was that the moment that their wife they felt was being disruptive or speaking out against them, they could kill them, they could throw them out of the house, they could be violent against them, they could even prostitute them out and receive money for it. How does Allah use a series of techniques in order to be able to place stops, to place a meaningful way to be able to stop and change behavior over the period of 23 years at the time of the Prophet? So he reveals a verse like this and says, for example, that you should admonish first instead of being violent. You should separate sleeping beds instead of being violent. And then if all end fails, you can strike them, but you have to strike them with a toothbrush or without leaving a mark. Okay? Now think about this. If the Quran is trying to lead us to a place which stops a certain type of act, does that mean that we then use those verses to continue the very same act? Let me give you an example of slavery. If we know that we're supposed to end slavery, do we use verses of slavery as reasons to be able to justify slavery? Or do we say the objective of those verses is for us to stop that act in the end? All God could do at that moment with that immediate society was start the trajectory of change. After 1400 years by now, we should have gotten rid of slavery.
Yeah.
In the same way, very quickly, we should have managed to have gotten rid of violence altogether in our familial situation. This isn't a verse permitting violence. This is a verse showing people that God put every stop and blockade possible in the mindset of those people to get them to stop this violence. That's the meaning of this verse. It's not giving you the leisure to be able to act violently. It is saying every possible outcome needs to be put in place to stop violence from happening. That's the way the verse needs to be explained to people. Instead of abusing the ayah, we need to explain it properly and tell people that abuse and violence in and of itself is haram. Therefore, how can Allah be justifying it for you?
So, in terms of the disconnect between what the verse is actually saying and actually trying to achieve.
Yes.
And
the objective of the verse.
The objective of the verse and what people are interpreting it as and practically manifesting it in their behavior. There is a gulf. So how do you bridge that gulf? Because as you mentioned previously, that the bid'ah has taken hold. How do you undo that damage? Because it's not a quick fix like putting a plaster on or something like that.
Yeah.
How do you heal that?
It's really interesting. If you have the rights being equal, as the ayah previously said, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, then if a man physically abuses the wife should have the right to be able to physically abuse the husband back to the same extent. The problem with that is, what does it create? A cycle of violence.
Yeah.
What does the hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam state? I am surprised at a man who strikes his wife when actually he is more deserved of being struck. What's really interesting is that these sorts of approaches are trying to open up the mindset that when you think that you are God and above reproach, that you have no accountability upon you, when it comes to all sections of Islam, it should be removing that notion from you. Inside the house, inside the family unit, inside the community, on the pulpit, every aspect of Islamic civilization should be geared towards breaking these notions of toxic masculinity, of violence as being the norm, and so on and so forth. Let me explain it in this way. In Arabia, when there were certain problems, the Quran repeatedly addressed those problems. And as Sister said, the Prophet went on the pulpit and repeatedly addressed it. In India, there's certain problems. Forgive me for saying this, societal problems with rape, for example.
Yep.
Yeah, it's systematic. If Islam was being properly applied in India, ayat after ayat would be, I can't say revealed, but would be being spoken about, reinforced constantly every day in society in order to address that problem of systematic rape and abuse of women in schools, in hospitals, on the streets, on buses, God forbid. In the Indo-Pak community, when domestic violence and abuse is prevalent, it should be that pulpit after pulpit, ayah after ayah, hadith after hadith is being reiterated. The whole system is trying to change this behavior, the same way it changed the behavior 1400 years ago. The whole system is geared towards it. It's not a one-off podcast. It's at the forefront of the community until we get rid of this problem. That's how Islam proper is supposed to be. And anything short of that, then the imams, the ulama, the khutaba, the dhakireen are failing, including me.
Thank you, Sheikh. We're drawing towards the end of our time. I'll ask one final question to each of you. These are the days of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and obviously the days of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. Any point of inspiration from these holy personalities that you think is, or anything, any poignant incident that you want to mention that, you know, helps you in your work as professionals dealing with this issue? Any final message for our viewers and relating it back to the days of Sayyidah Shuhada, to the days of Sayyidah Zainab, who stood up against oppression and doubt? I think that'll be a poignant moment to sort of conclude upon.
Yeah, I think that Sayyidah Zainab, salam alayhi, she was not a bystander. Imam Hussein made her an equal partner in his,
His mission.
in his mission, and she continued it. And what more, a better message than that is that she continued to rise up, and the Azadari, the Majalis, and everything we have today. This is her. You go to Arba'in, you see millions in the streets in this heat, and they are there because Sayyidah Zainab propagated that, and she instigated that change and that message. And we just have to make sure that Muharram is not an empty. It's not an empty gesture.
Yeah.
We live it. And yes.
So beautiful.
Sister.
She wasn't a bystander.
No.
Yeah, she wasn't a bystander. And I think, as you can imagine, being a Shia counselling service, Imam Hussein alayhi salam is a very, very important aspect of the healing journey for me and my clients. We have had sessions where we've literally turned the whole session into Majlis of Ababil alayhi salam, Majlis of the suffering of Imam Musa alayhi salam, for example. There is something that something about our pain that relates back to one of the Imams, or an aspect of the life of the Imam, the Sayyidah Zainab Salamullah alayha. We were talking about creating secure connections, secure attachments. And what we learn from how we look at Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and I think every kind of abuse that we've mentioned, he's experienced in his life, or his family members have experienced it, from child abuse, from betrayal, from separation from his daughter, Suhra alayhi salam, from being exiled, from having murder attempts committed upon him, from murder, from losing both his parents, from what has Sayyidah Shuhada alayhi salam not experienced?
Just to touch upon Imam al-Hassan's example, when we rarely talk about Imam al-Hassan's example, it's his own wife.
Yeah.
Who poisons the Imam. And what kind of I just, when you mentioned his parents.
It brings to light their suffering. Like, you think, okay, they also went through, it was almost like Allah was showing through us that they will, just because they're the imams that have appointed, the prophets that have appointed, they're not going to get any special treatment. Moreover, they will suffer more than the followers of these prophets and the followers of these imams. But what we have to learn is, okay, what's the way forward now? How do we build our capacity to address these issues, but also help ourselves and not fall into the trap of learned helplessness? So, and these figures that we have are cure. They are cure embodied, because they have given us the perfect example of what it means to go through all of that, and also shown us the capacity that we possess to still come out as the ones who Imam Hussein alayhi salam describes as the best companions he's ever had. They also had the same capacity, despite going through anywhere else. But the thread that we see through the example of Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam is that of justice and mercy, even with his enemies. He didn't become a perpetrator because of everything that he went through. We need to analyze this point. Why didn't Imam Hussein alayhi salam become a perpetrator regardless of everything that he went through? That was down to his secure attachment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For a man to stand in a place holding his 6-month-old baby, I find it mind-boggling that he can say the only things that makes this easy, and you say, Ya Imam, easy. What kind of attachment is that to Allah? What kind of trust is that in Allah? What kind of relationship is that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that same secure attachment was given to him through who? His parents.
Yeah, the best parents.
So Karbala is the peak of that lesson. Karbala, if you really deep it, it can disintegrate the problems that we're experiencing in our community within one session. But we have to take it like that. So today, if I sit here and we as a community make a promise now that, okay, going forward, we'll make one mission for ourselves that, okay, this year, why don't we address this topic of DV? Sit together, look at in what capacity can we contribute towards this issue, and take something practical. So tomorrow, when I stand in front of Abba Abdullah on 10th of Muharram again, I can say to him, look, I took a lesson from you last Ashura.
Yeah.
And this is what I've done. And now I need your help to take it further. Because it stemmed from you.
Thank you.
And that's how we live Karbala every day.
Yeah.
We have to live it every day if we are true to our covenant with Abba Abdullah alayhi salam. And as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, you help Abba Abdullah, you help Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and you help the Imam of our time. Ajalallah ta'ala.
Sheikh, any including?
Asad, I think in the context of the conversation we're having, the most important message to the men and to the sisters, but especially to the men, is to have the mercy, the rahmah that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had. When we say Husaynun minni wa ana min al-Hussein, whatever level of rahmah and compassion Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had, he had that same compassion that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One story, Prophet was in Salah and leading the Jama'ah, and there was a child that was crying, and the Prophet sped up his Salah and finished it like very, very quickly. And immediately everybody was shocked. They were like, has revelation come to you? Is that why you sped up your Salah? He said, didn't you hear that child crying?
Mm-hmm.
I finished my Salah quickly so that someone could pick him up or pacify him. Like just the crying of a child was so devastating to the Prophet. You know, we started the discussion with the ayah of the Quran that when you are in safety and security, then go and pray, right? With one child crying, the Prophet didn't feel secure. He had to rush through his Salah. if people had the mercy of the Prophet, or tried a little bit to have the mercy that the Prophet or Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhima had towards their wives, towards their husbands, towards their children, towards their in-laws, we could do away with a lot of the problems that we had.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. I think that's a really poignant moment for us to conclude and close this discussion. We've not been able to, we've covered a lot of different topics and a lot of different subjects, a breadth of issues. Inshallah, maybe we can come back another time and delve deeply into some of the issues that we've mentioned, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to actually practically put into action some of the things that we have discussed. And perhaps the community leaders who are listening to this, maybe they can work with us, reach out, and we can work together on something more practical and constructive for the betterment of this community. I just want to thank my esteemed panel, Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, Sister Fizza Tajwar, and Dr. Sania Naqvi, for your time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to do the work of say the shuhada, to say labbaik to his call, and to respond to the call of the Imam, and may Allah count us amongst the helpers and the Awan and the Shia of the Imam of our time, and may Allah hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time. And we thank our viewers for staying with us and watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.